villagers sold the tiny girl as a joke, giant Viking rule. "She'll birth my heirs." Children ran through the muddy streets, their laughter echoing against the stone walls, but behind that sound there was fear. Everyone in the village whispered about Ira, the tiny girl with eyes too old for her face. People said she was cursed, that misfortune followed her like a shadow, and parents avoided her as if her touch could burn their children. Ira had lived her life on the edges, slipping through the cracks of her own village. Her hands were small, her shoulders narrow, and her voice barely rose above a whisper. She moved like a ghost, quiet and unnoticed, which suited her. Being seen only brought questions and cruel jokes. On this day, the villagers gathered in the market square, the air thick with the scent of dried fish, smoke, and something sweet, like honey that had gone bad. The laughter of the men drinking from wooden cups rang through the square as they crowded around a wooden platform. A new face had arrived, a visitor from the north, enormous and silent, with a beard like dark iron and eyes sharp as winter ice. He did not speak, yet everyone felt his presence. He moved with a quiet weight, his boots striking the wooden planks with a sound that made people instinctively step back. Whispers spread. Bjorn Ironhand, the Viking lord from the northern fjords, feared by kings, respected even by spirits. The villagers knew they had an idea, a joke. The tiny, shivering girl was placed on the platform. "Look, Bjorn, a doll for the giant," they said, smirking. Some held back laughter, others spat into the mud. "Surely he will crush her with one hand." Ira's stomach twisted. Her small heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She wanted to vanish, to sink into the ground and never emerge, but she could not. There was no escape today. Bjorn's gaze fell on her, steady and unflinching. His silence was heavier than the laughter of the villagers. Ira felt as if his eyes could look through her, past the skin and bone, straight into the fragile threads of her soul. "You," he said finally, his voice low and deep like the rumble of distant thunder. The crowd went silent. "This girl, she is mine." A laugh erupted, cruel and high-pitched. "Yours? She's barely bigger than a rabbit. What could you want with her?" Bjorn's eyes did not waver. "She will bear my heirs," he said. The words were not boastful. They were certain, spoken like a truth carved in stone. The villagers froze. A cold wind swept across the market square, carrying with it a hint of something wild, something untamed, like the sea in a storm. Ira felt herself being lifted, carried by hands as large as tree trunks. She barely dared to breathe. Her mind raced with fear and disbelief. Was this really happening? Was she being taken away from the only home she had ever known? And yet, there was something in Bjorn's presence that made her heart tremble, a strange feeling that she could not name. The villagers watched as he turned and walked away, the girl in his arms. Their laughter died, replaced by murmurs and fear. They whispered of curses, of prophecies, of fate that had long ago chosen its players. Inside his fortress, Bjorn placed her gently on the floor. The hall was immense, carved from stone and ice, with tapestries that told stories of battles, of gods and men. Torches flickered against the walls, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Ira looked around, her small figure dwarfed by the giant columns and the towering ceilings. "You are frightened," Bjorn said, kneeling so his face was closer to hers. His voice was softer here, away from the crowd. "I do not wish to harm you." I don't understand," she stammered. "Why me?" He looked at her for a long time, his eyes unreadable. "There is a prophecy," he said finally. "A curse that has haunted my family for generations. Only someone like you, small, overlooked, underestimated, can break it." Ira's head spun. She wanted to ask more, but her voice caught in her throat. Fear, confusion, and something else, curiosity perhaps, fought inside her. Days passed, each one a test. Bjorn expected her to endure, to survive, to learn the ways of the fortress. He taught her to stand tall, to move without fear, to speak with courage even when her voice trembled. Ira discovered muscles in her arms she had never used, learned to lift objects she thought too heavy, and even to hold her own in the hallways when Bjorn's soldiers watched. Yet each lesson carried tension. Bjorn was a master of both patience and intensity. He could be gentle, then suddenly stern, testing her resolve with a glance or a word. She found herself torn between fear and fascination. His eyes seemed to judge her, measure her, see everything she wished to hide. And somehow, that judgment made her feel alive in a way she never had. Ira's nights were the hardest. She lay on a thin mat near the hearth, listening to the wind whistle through the stone cracks. Shadows danced across the walls, and she imagined them as creatures from the tales she had heard as a child, spirits of the lost, guardians of secrets, or perhaps the echo of the prophecy itself. Sometimes she thought she could hear whispers, words carried by the wind. "You are chosen, you must endure." One evening, she wandered the fortress corridors alone, unable to sleep. She came upon a door she had not seen before, carved with runes that glowed faintly in the torchlight. Curiosity overcame fear, and she pushed it open. Inside was a chamber filled with objects that seemed almost alive, crystal vessels, masks of ancient warriors, and portraits of children who looked eerily familiar. Her breath caught. She understood then that Bjorn's life was not just a life of battles and blood. It was a life haunted by what had been lost. Each portrait was a child who had been promised to the prophecy, each vessel a fragment of a hope that had never been fulfilled. And now she was next. Suddenly a whisper brushed her ear. "He is not your captor, he is your reckoning." Ira spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. The voice had been soft, like the rustle of leaves in a storm. She did not know whether to feel fear or awe. The weight of the prophecy, of her destiny, pressed down on her small shoulders. She returned to her mat that night with a sense of both dread and determination. She had been taken from the village, from everything familiar, but she was beginning to see that she might not be powerless. The prophecy had chosen her, yes, but perhaps she could choose too. Perhaps she could shape her fate rather than simply endure it. And yet the question lingered, burning like a fire in the pit of her stomach. What must I do to survive? That night, the wind outside the fortress howled louder than ever. Shadows from the torches stretched long across the stone floor, twisting and bending as if they were alive. Ira felt a strange energy in the air, a pulse that made her heart beat faster. She rose from her mat and walked to the window, looking out over the dark fjord. A figure moved on the cliffs below, dark, silent, and impossibly large. Bjorn, she realized, surveying the land he called home. He turned his gaze upward as if he sensed her watching. Their eyes met through the darkness, and Ira felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in his look, an unspoken challenge, a question, a warning that she could not name. And then from the shadows of the wind a faint whisper returned. "The prophecy begins. The reckoning has come." Ira's pulse quickened. She knew deep inside that nothing would ever be the same. She was no longer the tiny girl of the village. She was chosen, marked, and pulled into a world larger and darker than she could have imagined. The market, the laughter, the cruel villagers, they were already behind her. Ahead lay shadows, storms, and a giant whose power and sorrow dwarfed her tiny body, yet stirred something inside her that she could not ignore. And in that moment, she realized the story of her life had only just begun. The fortress was alive with the wind and the cold. Its stone walls groaned under the weight of the storms that swept from the fjords, and the torches flickered like tiny suns against the endless darkness of the halls. Ira walked carefully on the cold stone floors, her small feet making soft, cautious sounds. The fortress was enormous, and each hallway seemed to stretch further than her mind could imagine. Shadows danced on the walls, and the scent of pine and burning oil filled the air. Bjorn Ironhand did not speak as she moved through the hall. His massive form was always near, watching, silent, like a shadow she could never escape. Sometimes, when she dared to look at him, she could see the storm behind his eyes, the weight of battles, of prophecy, and of endless winters. He was a man of iron, of fire, and yet there was a strange sadness that clung to him like frost on a stone. "You must learn to move through the halls as if they are part of you," Bjorn said one morning, his voice low, echoing against the stone. Ira nodded, her small hands trembling slightly. "Or the shadows will consume you." Ira did not understand at first. Shadows had always been her friends in the village, places where she could hide and breathe. But here, shadows seemed alive, dangerous, full of whispers and secret threats. And she realized slowly that the fortress had secrets. Secrets that belonged to Bjorn, secrets she could feel in her bones. Days passed like this. She learned to carry firewood heavier than her body, to climb stairs that seemed endless, and to stand still while Bjorn's soldiers tested her endurance. She learned to listen to the whispers of the wind, to understand when the storm meant danger and when it meant silence. Slowly, Ira felt herself changing. Her small body became stronger, her voice became firmer, and her heart learned to endure the strange tension between fear and curiosity that followed Bjorn wherever he went. Bjorn, for his part, did not soften. He never raised his hand against her in anger, yet the lessons were harsh. He could speak gently one moment, and the next moment his voice would thunder through the hallways, commanding respect, testing her limits. Ira learned to read the flicker of his eyes, to understand when he wanted obedience and when he wanted courage. She was small, yet she felt herself growing in ways she had never imagined. One evening, the sky outside was a dark, deep purple. The wind had fallen, leaving only the quiet hum of the fortress. Ira walked along the battlements, staring at the distant fjord where the waves crashed against jagged rocks. She could see the horizon, black and endless, and she felt both fear and longing. Bjorn joined her without a sound. His large shadow fell over her small form, and she did not flinch. There was something about his presence that was terrifying and yet strangely comforting. "You are learning," he said softly, "faster than I expected." Ira swallowed, her throat dry. "I have no choice," she whispered. "If I fail the prophecy," Bjorn's eyes softened for a brief moment. "The prophecy is not just mine," he said. "It is ours, and it is not finished yet. You have a part to play, but so do I." Her small hand brushed against the cold stone, and she felt a strange warmth. For the first time, she realized that she was not just a pawn in someone else's story. She had power. The power to endure, to survive, to shape the future. And yet the weight of that realization was heavy. She had been sold as a joke. She had been taken from the only home she had ever known. And now she was expected to carry a destiny far greater than herself. The days became longer, filled with lessons of strength and endurance. Bjorn taught her how to defend herself with wooden staffs, how to move quietly through the fortress, and how to read the shadows for threats. Ira discovered that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Her hands grew calloused, her arms stronger, and her mind sharper. Yet, even as she grew, the tension between her and Bjorn deepened. There were moments when he would stand close, and she could feel the warmth of his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the weight of his gaze. She would catch herself staring, her heart racing, but fear always returned to remind her of her place. She was small. He was a giant, and yet she could not deny the pull she felt toward him, the strange curiosity and awe that made her feel alive. One night, Ira could not sleep. She wandered the fortress corridors, her small feet making soft sounds against the stone. The torches flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move and bend like living things. She found herself in a hall she had not explored before, one filled with tapestries that told stories of battles and heroes. The images seemed alive, almost breathing, and she felt a shiver run through her small body. She touched one tapestry, a scene of a great battle between men and spirits. Her fingers traced the figures, and she felt a strange energy, like the whisper of the prophecy brushing against her soul. And then she heard a sound, a soft, almost inaudible voice that spoke directly to her heart. "You are more than you know. You are the key." Ira spun around, but the hall was empty. The torches flickered and the shadows danced across the walls. She knew the voice had come from the wind or perhaps from the tapestry itself. Fear and wonder swirled inside her, and she felt a strange excitement. She was not alone. She never had been. The next day, Bjorn called her to the great hall. The soldiers were there, but they did not speak. Bjorn's eyes were sharp and his voice was commanding. "Today, you will face the first trial," he said. "A test of strength, courage, and will. You must prove yourself." Ira's heart raced. She had been training, yes, but this was something different. She had been learning, but she did not know if she was ready. The trial began in the courtyard, where the wind cut across the stone like a blade. She faced obstacles that tested her agility and her resolve. Bjorn watched, silent and imposing, his eyes never leaving her. She stumbled once, and the cold stone scraped her hands. Pain shot through her, but she rose, driven by a strange force she did not fully understand. She wanted to survive, yes, but she also wanted to prove herself to him, to show that she was not just a tiny girl but a force in her own right. When the trial ended, she stood in the center of the courtyard, exhausted and trembling. Bjorn stepped forward, his large hand resting on her shoulder. "You have done well," he said, "better than I expected." Her chest rose and fell, her small hands shaking. For the first time she felt a sense of pride. She had faced the trial, endured the storm, and survived. And yet the shadow of the prophecy loomed over her like a storm cloud she could not escape. That night, Ira lay on her mat, thinking of the day's events. The fortress was quiet, the wind sleeping after its long howl. She closed her eyes and thought of the voices she had heard, the whispers that had guided her. She thought of Bjorn, his eyes, his presence, and the strange pull that drew her closer even as she feared him. And then from the shadows she heard it again, a faint, almost melodic whisper. "The reckoning comes. Prepare yourself, for it will not wait." Ira sat up, her heart racing. She did not know what it meant or who had spoken, but she felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her. She realized that her life had changed forever. The market, the village, the laughter of the villagers, all were behind her. She was no longer a tiny girl sold as a joke. She was chosen, marked, and called to a purpose far greater than herself. She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the fjord. The waves crashed against the cliffs, white against the darkness. And there on the distant rocks she saw him, Bjorn Ironhand, silent and imposing, watching the horizon. Their eyes met and she felt a shiver run through her. There was something in his gaze, an unspoken challenge, a warning, a question she could not answer. And then from the wind the whisper returned. "The prophecy begins. The reckoning has come." Ira knew she had no choice. She was part of this story now, a story larger than herself, filled with storms, shadows, and giants. And deep inside she felt a strange thrill. She was afraid, yes, but she was alive. And for the first time, she understood that even the smallest person could hold the power to change the world. The wind outside the fortress howled like a restless spirit, pushing snow against the tall stone walls. Inside, the great hall was warm, lit by flickering torches that cast long, moving shadows on the stone floor. Ira moved quietly, her small boots echoing softly, as she followed Bjorn through corridors she had never seen. Tonight was different. Bjorn's expression was darker, heavier than usual, and even the soldiers whispered uneasily. "We are going to the forest," Bjorn said, his voice low, almost a growl. "It is time you face the heart of the curse." Ira's stomach twisted. The forest beyond the cliffs was said to be haunted. Old legends told of spirits and lost souls, of trees that whispered and rivers that ran black under the moon. She had heard the stories in her village as a child, but hearing Bjorn speak them now made her blood run cold. "You will not walk alone," he added, his eyes locking with hers. "But you must act, you must be brave." The words felt heavier than any stone she had carried in the fortress. She nodded silently, trying to swallow her fear. Inside, a quiet voice whispered, "You are the key. You must endure." They rode through the snow-laden cliffs on horses as black as midnight, the wind biting at Ira's face, tearing at her cloak. Bjorn rode beside her, silent, his armor glinting faintly in the moonlight. The forest lay ahead, dark and endless, with trees taller than the highest towers of the fortress. Shadows moved between the trunks, and the air smelled of damp earth and cold mist. When they entered the forest, the world seemed to shift. The snow grew thinner, and the silence became deeper, like the quiet before a storm. Ira could feel the pulse of the place beneath her feet, the thrum of magic and history older than the mountains themselves. Her heart beat faster. Every step she took felt like she was crossing into another world, a place where prophecy and power were alive and waiting. Bjorn stopped near a large clearing where the moonlight fell like silver rain. The trees formed a circle around them, and the wind seemed to whisper secrets through their branches. Ira stepped forward, her breath visible in the cold night air, and she saw them, shadows moving in the corners of her vision. Figures faint and flickering like echoes of those who had come before her. "They are testing you," Bjorn said softly, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Do not be afraid. They are the remnants of the curse." Ira swallowed hard. The shadows began to move closer, forming shapes she recognized from the tapestries in the fortress. Children, warriors, spirits with hollow eyes. They surrounded her, circling, whispering in voices she could almost understand. Fear gripped her, yet she did not run. She remembered the lessons Bjorn had taught her, the strength she had gained, and she forced herself to stand tall. "You are not here to fight them," Bjorn said quietly. "You are here to face them, to understand them. Only then can the curse be broken." The shadows swirled faster, voices rising into a chorus that made the hair on Ira's arm stand on end. They spoke of loss, of pain, of futures that had never come to be. And through their whispers, she felt a strange connection, as if the sorrow they carried was also a part of her own. Her heart ached for them, and in that moment she understood the weight of the prophecy. She was not just a participant, she was a witness, a guardian, and perhaps the one who could finally end the pain. Ira stepped forward, extending her small hand. "I am here," she whispered. "I see you, I hear you, I will help you." The shadows paused, and for a moment the world held its breath. Then, slowly, the figures began to fade, leaving behind a soft glow in the clearing. Ira's chest rose and fell with the effort of holding her courage. She looked at Bjorn, whose expression had softened, though his eyes still held the weight of storms. "You have done well," he said. "Few have the courage to face the heart of the curse and remain unbroken." Ira's legs trembled, but she felt a spark inside her that she had never felt before. She was no longer just a tiny girl. She was becoming someone capable, someone strong, someone who could face even the most terrifying shadows of the world. The wind shifted, and with it came a sound that made Ira freeze, a low, haunting voice that carried across the clearing. "The choice is yours, little one. The path of sacrifice or the path of power. Which will you take?" Ira's heart pounded. She did not know what the voice meant, but she sensed its truth. The prophecy was not just a story, it was a path, and she was standing at the center of it. She looked at Bjorn, who did not speak, but his gaze seemed to tell her, "You must choose." They returned to the fortress in silence, the forest behind them seeming to swallow itself in shadow once more. Ira's mind was alive with questions, fear, and an unfamiliar thrill. She felt herself changing, becoming stronger, yet more aware of the weight of destiny pressing down on her small shoulders. That night, Ira wandered the halls once more, drawn by a sense she could not name. She came upon the hidden chamber she had discovered earlier, the one filled with portraits of the lost heirs and ancient vessels. Her eyes scanned the images, and she felt a deep sadness for those who had come before her, children whose lives had been claimed by prophecy and curse. A soft whisper echoed in the chamber, barely audible. The heart of the curse has been touched. The reckoning draws near. Ira's small hand brushed over a crystal vessel, and she felt a jolt, like a spark of lightning through her fingertips. She gasped, pulling back, and saw a faint image shimmer inside the crystal. A child, small and fragile, surrounded by shadows. She realized with a start, this was a vision of the future, a child who had yet to be born. Her mind raced. Could she be connected to this child? Was the prophecy already beginning to unfold? Bjorn appeared behind her, silent as always. "You have seen it," he said softly. "The curse is not just a story of the past. It reaches forward, touching the future. You are part of it, Ira, as much as I am." Ira's heart pounded. She did not know what to say. Fear, awe, and a strange thrill mixed together in her chest. She realized that she was no longer just learning. She was living the prophecy, stepping into it with every choice she made. "You are not afraid," she whispered. Bjorn shook his head. "Afraid, always, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it." The night deepened, and the shadows in the chamber seemed to lean closer, whispering secrets that only Ira could hear. She felt a strange connection to them, a bond that was both terrifying and comforting. She realized that the curse, for all its darkness, could be broken, not by strength alone, but by understanding, compassion, and courage. As she stood there, the wind outside howled, carrying the sound of distant wolves and the rustle of unseen trees. The fortress trembled slightly, as if it too sensed the changes within. Ira's eyes met Bjorn's, and in that moment they understood each other without words. They were not master and servant, giant and tiny girl, but two souls bound by destiny, prophecy, and a growing, unspoken trust. But even as they shared that understanding, a new sound arose, a distant scream, echoing from the cliffs beyond the fjord. It was human, yet carried a note of something otherworldly, something that made Ira's blood run cold. She and Bjorn exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement that their journey was far from over. The whispers of the shadows grew louder, urgent. "The reckoning is closer. The first choice has been made. The second will demand more." Ira knew that the future she had glimpsed in the crystal vessel was only the beginning. The prophecy was moving forward, and her role was no longer hidden. She had survived the forest, faced the shadows, and touched the heart of the curse. Yet the hardest trials were still to come. As the dawn approached, painting the fortress walls with pale light, Ira stood at the window once more, looking toward the distant cliffs and the endless horizon. Her heart was a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. She had grown stronger, braver, and wiser, yet she knew the path ahead would demand more than she had ever imagined. And in the distance, beyond the fjords, the wind carried a single whisper, clear and haunting. "The second test begins at the edge of the world, and you are not alone." The wind howled across the cliffs like a living thing. The fjord below crashed against jagged rocks, white against the darkness. The fortress behind them seemed smaller now, dwarfed by the endless mountains and frozen rivers. Ira stood at the edge of the highest cliff, her small figure swaying slightly against the cold. She could feel the pulse of the world beneath her feet, the heartbeat of something ancient, powerful, and alive. Bjorn stood beside her, massive and unwavering, his eyes scanning the horizon. The shadows of the forest lingered below, and the faint glow of spectral figures rose from the trees. They were the echoes of the curse, the lost heirs, the children of prophecy, the souls trapped between time and fate. "They are waiting," Bjorn said softly, "and so are we." Ira's hands trembled. She had come so far, from a tiny girl sold as a joke to someone standing at the edge of destiny itself. Her heart raced with fear, awe, and a strange determination she had never felt before. The shadows began to rise from the forest like a tide, twisting and shifting into shapes she could not fully recognize. Some looked like children, some like warriors, some like beings of pure darkness. Their whispers rose into a chorus that filled the cold air, voices layered with sorrow, anger, and longing. You are ready, Bjorn said, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. His eyes softened for the briefest moment, and Ira felt a strange warmth. I will not leave you. You will not face this alone. Ira nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She remembered the crystal vessel in the hidden chamber, the vision of the child surrounded by shadows. She realized now that the curse was not just about Bjorn or the lost heirs, it was about her too. Her courage, her choices, and her heart were all part of the solution. The first shadow approached, tall and dark, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce her very soul. Ira's small hands shook, but she stepped forward. She did not raise a weapon, did not cry out in fear. She looked into the shadow's eyes and whispered, I see you. I know your pain. I will help you. The shadow paused, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then it shivered, and a faint light appeared in its darkness. One by one the shadows followed, each touched by her words, each showing a spark of recognition, of hope. Bjorn watched silently, his massive frame like a rock against the storm. When the last shadow bent slightly, acknowledging Ira's courage, he spoke. The curse weakens, but it is not gone. The final step is yours. Ira's heart pounded. She did not know what the final step was, but she felt it in her bones, a choice, a moment of truth. The wind carried a voice, clear and haunting. To end the curse, the child must be protected, the heart of the past forgiven, and the bond of courage and love made whole. Her mind raced. She understood now. The lost heirs, the spectral children, the shadows, they were part of her responsibility. She had to protect the hope of the future and heal the wounds of the past. She turned to Bjorn. Tell me what to do, she whispered. Bjorn looked at her, his eyes fierce and tender at once. Do not let fear guide you. Let your heart, your courage, and your understanding lead. Only then will the prophecy be fulfilled. Ira stepped forward, her small hands glowing with the faint light of magic she did not fully understand. The shadows surged, a wave of sorrow and longing, but she did not retreat. She reached toward them, her voice steady, her heart full. You are free, she said. Your pain ends tonight. The shadows trembled, then dissolved into a radiant light that spiraled into the sky. Ira could feel the weight of the centuries lifting, the sorrow and anger of the lost heirs fading into the wind. Her legs wobbled from exhaustion, but her heart was light, and a strange warmth spread through her chest. Bjorn stepped closer, his massive hands brushing against hers. You have done it, he said. The curse is broken. Ira's breath came in ragged gasps. She looked at the clearing, now bathed in the pale light of dawn. The forest seemed calmer, softer, as if it too had been released from a long winter of pain. And then she saw it, a small figure emerging from the shadows, a child glowing with the faint light of life and hope. This is the beginning, Bjorn said quietly. The future we have protected, the legacy we have secured, it is yours as much as mine. Ira felt a surge of emotion, fear, relief, awe, and a strange joy. She had faced shadows, prophecy, and destiny itself, and she had survived. She had grown stronger, braver, and wiser. She had found courage she did not know existed. The child stepped closer, reaching for her hand. Ira knelt, her small figure meeting the child's glowing eyes. She felt a connection deeper than words, a bond that carried hope, love, and promise. Bjorn watched them, a soft smile touching his lips. You have changed, Ira, he said. Not just the curse, but yourself. You are no longer a tiny girl. You are a force of life, courage, and hope. Ira looked up at him, and for the first time she saw not only the giant of iron and storms, but the man behind the strength, the loneliness behind the power. There was a gentleness, a quiet sorrow, and a deep longing that mirrored her own. They stood together, two figures on the cliffs of destiny, the wind carrying away the remnants of the curse. The fjord below roared, the mountains stretched endlessly, and the dawn painted the sky with gold and rose. Ira's small hand rested in Bjorn's massive one. Neither spoke, but their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. They had faced prophecy, shadows, and destiny itself, and had emerged stronger, united by courage and trust. The wind shifted, carrying with it the whispers of the past, the blessings of the lost heirs, and the promise of a future yet to come. Ira realized that the prophecy was not just a chain of fate, it was a story of transformation, of growth, and of redemption. She had been small and overlooked, but she had become a guardian, a force that could shape the world. And as she looked at the glowing child, she understood the final truth of the prophecy. Hope and courage, when guided by love and understanding, could overcome even the darkest curses. Bjorn's voice was soft now, a whisper against the wind. The world is vast, Ira. But together we can face it. Shadows will come again, storms will rise, but we have the strength to endure. Ira nodded, her heart swelling with courage and determination. She had been sold as a joke, taken from her home, and thrust into a destiny she had never asked for. Yet she had endured, grown, and transformed. And now, standing at the edge of the world, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. The fortress behind them seemed smaller in the light of dawn, a place of lessons, trials, and shadowed halls. The cliffs stretched endlessly, the wind carried promise and freedom, and the child's small hand in hers was a symbol of the future. Together, they would face it all. The prophecy had begun, the curse had ended, and the dawn of a new era was rising. And as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the world in gold and rose, Ira realized that even the tiniest person, sold as a joke, could hold the power to change destinies, heal the past, and protect the future. The wind carried one last whisper, gentle and warm. The reckoning is complete, the heart is free, the story begins anew. Ira squeezed the child's hand, looked at Bjorn, and felt the strength of courage, love, and hope binding them together. The shadows were gone, but their memory would remain, a reminder of the journey, the trials, and the growth they had endured. The fortress, the fjord, the cliffs, all were witnesses to the transformation, to the redemption, and to the bond that had formed between them. And in that moment, Ira understood fully. She was no longer the tiny girl of the village. She was a guardian of hope, a force of courage, and a living part of prophecy. And together with Bjorn, she would face whatever the world had to offer. The dawn rose higher, the winds calmed, and the world seemed to hold its breath in admiration of the courage and strength of a tiny girl who had become a giant in heart, spirit, and destiny.